Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, and I direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Rebecca Roanhorse's new book, Black Sun, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores to now just one, the sole survivor, the Strand, which is now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors like Rebecca and John, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so very appreciative of it. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Rebecca Roanhorse to launch her new book, the first book in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, Black Sun. Rebecca is a New York Times bestselling author of Trail of Lightning, Storm of Locusts, Star Wars, Resistance Born, and Race to the Sun. She's won the Hugo, Nebula, and Locus Awards for her fiction and was the recipient of the 2018 Astounding Award for Best New Writer. She lives in New Mexico with her family. Joining her in conversation is Strand alum and fellow sci-fi author John Scalzi. John is the author of several sci-fi novels, including his massively successful best-selling Old Man's War sequence, comprising Old Man's War, The Ghost Brigades, The Last Colony, Zoe's Tale, The Human Division, and The End of All Things. His other novels include the New York Times bestsellers Lock-In, Fuzzy Nation, and Red Shirts. The latter novel won science fiction's Hugo Award in 2013. He also won a Hugo Award for Your Hate Mail Will Be Graded, a collection of essays from his popular blog, Whatever. His most recent release is the New York Times bestseller, The Last Emperix. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming John and Rebecca to the stage.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Hi, John.
Hello. Hi,
Again.
Rebecca. Again. Yes, we were in the green room. They have a green room backstage, and we were all catching up. Let me do a couple of things real quick. So here's how we're going to do things. Rebecca and I are going to talk for about 30, 40 minutes about the fabulous new book, Black Sun. Here it is right here. And other stuff about writing, so that will be fun. While we're doing that, you can be thinking of questions that you want to ask Rebecca mostly, but both of us if you want. And you do that by going into the Ask a Question thing, and you can see that right down here, right there, where it says Ask a Question. Click on that and put the question in. If you put it into the chat area, which I can see you all talking in, it's going to scroll up and we just won't be able to see it. So put it in the Ask a Question, and do ask questions specifically relating to writing and specifically relating to Black Sun or some of Rebecca's other fabulous books, because those are going to be real fun to get her answers from. The second thing is we are in a virtual space, and what that means is sometimes technology goes kerplooey. So if one of the other of us just all of a sudden sort of disappears or gets all janky or something like that, don't panic. These things happen. If one of us drops, we'll come right back on. The other one will vamp and stretch it out for a bit. But don't panic. We will return and everything will be fine. That's just what the COVID tour syndrome is like these days. Which reminds me, this I believe is your last tour stop. Is that correct?
That is correct. I saved the best for last, John.
Yay! I'm so flattered. But let me ask you, I mean, because I did my own tour like this in April. It was one of the very first virtual tours. I was actually on a cruise. You remember that?
I was on that cruise as well.
You were on the other cruise as well. When I found out that my tour had been canceled because the entire world was shutting down, and then immediately they ramped it back up as a virtual thing. How has the virtual tour experience been for you? How's it been going?
You know, it's been actually going pretty well. If this was a normal year, I would have been on airplanes every day, staying in hotels, probably not with my family. And now I get to stay in my house and eat dinner at my own table every night and just kind of hang out and still get to talk to lots of different people. So
Yeah.
I've actually kind of enjoyed it. It's been kind of nice.
It has been. It's been interesting to me because all the things that you say absolutely apply. I mean, it's great to be able to just hop on, like here I am in my home office and I hop on and I get to do this and then I'm done and I get to go and pet my cat and I don't have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and sit in a middle seat on the way to Denver or wherever. On the other hand, one of the things that I did notice is especially at first when we first started doing these, I would get off the events and I would just feel like I was going to collapse because there was just when you have a crowd with you, then you kind of feed off of them. But this is just throwing everything into a webcam and hoping people actually are enjoying it. So, the thing that I actually find has been really helpful is they figured out a funny thing, which is if you pair up two authors, they'll just talk. They'll just talk and it sounds completely normal.
Yeah. Trying to get by yourself would be a lot. I think that would be totally draining, but you have a great conversation partner and, things work out.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that also what really helps in this particular case, aside from you being a fabulous conversational partner, we've had many conversations before, is that you've written a fabulous book.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We've had this scheduled for a couple of months now when they said, hey, do you want to do this event with Rebecca? And I was like, absolutely, I want to do this event with Rebecca. And then the book came out and I was like, they haven't sent me the book. So I had to email your publicist. I was like, could you send me the book, please? I would love to read it. Because otherwise my questions would be like, so do you actually like the color black? Is that why it's... I have context now because I actually did read the book, and what a book! You don't waste any time in this book at all. Your first chapter, wow! I mean, that's a heck of a way to start. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read the book yet, but what a way to start! And that's actually a good place to start for this. When you're writing, what is your philosophy of starting books? The first chapter, the first lines. What are you striving for when you start that?
Well, definitely the hook. I'm trying to get readers pulled into the story immediately. I'm sort of obsessed with first lines. I read tons of first lines. I go over and over like what other people do. And when I finally land on the correct first line, like I will know it, and it captures sort of everything I sort of want to do with that story in a way. And that's it, I've got it. And then, really for that first chapter, Danielle Clayton once, she was talking about my work and she said, that is your drop of blood in the champagne. And I was like, yes, ma'am. So I often open with a little bit of violence, but it certainly gets the reader's attention, I think, and hopefully gets them connected to the character very quickly.
Yeah, well, and I think I think your philosophy of first lines is one that I absolutely believe in as well. I've always told people the first line buys you the first page buys you the first chapter. If you get them through the first chapter, they're going to buy the book, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's actually interesting, as you say, it's the drop of blood in the champagne. It's a tough in many ways. There's violence in that first chapter. The violence is not, to be clear, the violence was not gratuitous. It was absolutely essential to the story. Yes. But you also didn't pull back at all. You did not pull any punches with what you were doing with that. And was that something you were thinking of where you're like, is this too much, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's definitely a calculated risk. I understand that because I won't spoil it too much, but it is sort of mother and son sort of situation that could make people very uncomfortable. And I know I probably have lost some people who are like, oh no, this is too much for me. Like I remember reading the first of N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, and the child dies at the beginning, and I was like, oh no, I can't read this right now, I can't read it. So I did put it down for a while, and I came back to it because it's a wonderful book, clearly, but you sort of have to be in that mindset. So I knew it was a calculated risk. And I had sort of done the same thing with Trail of Lightning. There's violence in the second chapter of that. And I know that's not for everyone. But
Sure.
it's thematically germane to the story. You know,
Right.
the Black Sun is about, generational trauma and, what we pass down to our children and, sort of these destinies we don't ask for. And all of that is there in that first chapter. I'm sort of setting the themes for the larger story. So that I guess is what I'm really trying to do. It's not a throwaway chapter at all. It's something that's really important. And if you sort of will probably come together as you read through, hopefully you'll go back and be like, oh yeah, I see, because in that first chapter,
Right.
this is sort of what was happening, and this sort of creates the setting for the whole story.
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely true. I mean, it's a phenomenal first chapter. I mean, just in terms of not only grabbing the attention with, first lines, first pages and everything else, but setting the table. It's basically, it's an entire first chapter of Chekhov's guns. You know what I mean?
Yes. And I use them all.
And you use them all. They all go off sooner or later. But that is actually the next question that I'm kind of curious about. Because you have that first chapter sets so much up, it does make me wonder as a writer, sort of structurally, when you're placing all of these guns, did you know that they were all going to go off, or did you put them all there and then as you were going along in the writing go, oh, I found a use for that gun? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I do outline. So I sort of know what I'm going to write. It's a very loose outline. Often I'll do maybe like 80% of the novel. So I won't know how the last 20% is going to end until I get there. Because I sort of want to leave room for the muse, I guess, for a little bit of, for it to surprise me a little bit. I was talking to V.E. Schwab, and she was saying, I have to know how it ends. I can't write, I can't even start until I know how it ends. And I was like, oh, yeah, I wish I was like that. I would be much more organized and be much more prolific, perhaps. But So I think there is a lot of gun placement. I sort of know these things are hot, and I know I have to come back to them. And I might know generally, sort of where we're going to go. Like I did know the character Serapia, who's in that first chapter. I did know his ending. I did know where I wanted him at the end of the novel. So it was just sort of building him there and making sure, that I was hitting all those sort of promises that I had laid out. Hopefully in a satisfactory way to get you to the end.
Yeah. Well, and of course the end, will not spoil, but is just as good as the beginning as far as I'm concerned. I know that sounds like I'm being flattering and all that sort of stuff, but the fact is it's a good book and you're a good writer. What can I say?
Thank you, John.
I mean, I'm not just saying that because you asked me to interview you, but but one of the things that I think is really interesting is, so this is a first book in a planned trilogy. That's correct.
Yes, right.
And you pull off a really good trick, which having just completed my own trilogy, I know is a thing that is tough to do and even tougher to make it look easy, which is the end of the book this book has a complete arc in and of itself, but it leaves enough open for what's to come. And as the writer of the book, how do you decide what things are going to have closure in this book? Because every book has to have its own arc. I really believe that. But what things are the things that you decide to solve in this book, and what are the things that you decide to leave open for the next two books? How did you go about that balancing?
Yeah, well, so I knew, this is a big epic fantasy, and like every good epic fantasy, there's a journey where there's four actual point of views in the story, and I knew two of the characters who team up early have to get from point A to point B. The other two characters are sort of in point B already, but they are on a sort of collision course with the other two. So I knew that book one needed to end when they all collide at this event called the Convergence, which is like a solar eclipse, like on the solstice. So I knew that had to happen. And then I just had to plan my characters' arcs with that in mind. Like, where did they
Sure.
need to be when that happened, sort of emotionally, not just physically. And what story had I sort of started, for example, with Serapio, that reached its natural conclusion at the end of the book when he met everyone at the convergence. So it's funny because I read a few reviews that are like, this is the cliffhanger, you know, like of all cliffhangers, and I'm hanging on, you know, by like my fingernails. And I'm always thinking, it's not really that much of a cliffhanger.
Right.
It doesn't feel like a cliffhanger to me, but
Right.
you know, I'm biased.
I am totally there with you because the Interdependency, which is the trilogy that I just completed. So the Collapsing Empire, which is the first book, very much the same sort of thing. There's an arc to that book, but there's enough that's left over, and people are like, "How dare you leave it a cliffhanger? How could you do that?" I'm like, "Well, one, we all knew going in it was a trilogy. It was right there on the cover of the first book of the Interdependency. It's right there. You know there was more coming." And, you know, so I didn't feel too bad about it. I'm like, of course I'm going to have a cliffhanger. It's like, how dare you hook me and make me want to read book 2? You're a terrible person. It's like, you understand that's the job. That's my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. But I do think, it is really important that you do have, that the book in and of itself has that satisfying sort of, this story is told and it can only be contained within this length and this book, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you do want people to walk away satisfied. I don't want to leave them feeling like the arc didn't complete or like that there's something missing. It's just that there's enough, you know, sort of meat still on the bone that the story can easily continue, you know, and hopefully you're excited to know what happens next for these characters.
Right. And I think that's the thing about building a trilogy, is that you know that you have that sort of luxury. When you've written books in series before, Trail of Lightning and its sequel, did you know that those were going to be, that was going to be a series, or did you write one and then they said write another?
Well, I signed a 2-book deal when I sold Trail, and I had thought of it as a series, which is different than the trilogy. Those are really, for me, I mean, yeah, they're all a little cliffhangery because maybe that's just what I do. But they're very self-contained also, because I was thinking of them in sort of the way that urban fantasy series are written, where, you know, it's each one has sort of a mystery to solve, and so you solve that mystery, and that's that book. But maybe the characters move on, and the characters grow, and you add new characters, and you expand the world. But it's sort of one by one, you know, through the series. But each book is pretty self-contained, and so that's how I approached writing Trail and Storm of Locusts. Whereas this one, clearly, I'm thinking of, you know, the larger arc from the very beginning. Like, while the story ends on its own, certainly the larger story does not. Right. So you kind of need to read the whole thing.
Yeah, there's definitely more. There's definitely more to be coming as far as that goes. And of course, people are going to be like, "I've read it. When's the next one?" And you're like, it's like, I don't know what to tell you. It's coming.
I'm working on it.
It's gonna happen. It's like, it's not an actual problem. One of the things that really impressed me about this book is honestly the depth of the world building. And you know, honestly, I mentioned backstage that I had prepared a whole bunch of questions just in case our conversation like flagged and we had awkward spaces or anything like that. And almost all of them are about world building, because I mean, there's just, you done some, one, you got, look at these maps. These are, it's cool. Now, in the acknowledgments, you mentioned your daughter helped make the maps. Is that correct? Talk about that.
Yes, because that is awesome. Correct. So Black said, I have a copy right here myself. So there's one map there, and then there's a map in the back. So you get 2 maps, which is like
2 maps.
Fantasy writer dream come true.
Which, by the way, I am bitterly jealous of. I have never in my life gotten anything like this. I mean, come on. I'm just sitting here. I'm admiring it, and it's beautiful. But that part of the brain that is like, I've never gotten that. Laura thinks I'm chopped liver. I felt the same way. Sarah Gailey, they got these beautiful end covers for Magic for Liars, and I was like, my debut book was just plain end papers. It's fine. Anyway, no,
Yes.
but seriously, so this is the continent in the front, and in the back, this is the city of Tova. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually my daughter's birthday today. So shout out, happy birthday to you, Maya. She is 13. She is much more artistically talented on the visual side than I am.
Sure.
So I had this continent in mind, the Meridian, where this all takes place, and the city of Tova, which is really inspired by sort of Chaco Canyon, a little bit of Chaco Canyon, a little bit of Mesa Verde, a little bit of Machu Picchu. It's like a city in the clouds, but then it's built on mesas and down into cliff sides and things. And so I sort of knew what I wanted, but I needed someone with a lot more talent than me to sort of match out draw out the maps. So she took a first stab at the maps. And you might notice that first one, if you tilt it just right, looks a little bit like the Gulf of Mexico.
I
right?
did notice that, and that was going to be one of my follow-up questions. So talk about that a little.
Yeah, so like I said, this is inspired by Mesoamerican cultures, which pre-Columbian. So really that includes Texas, New Mexico, sort of everything around the Gulf. So you see sort of the influences of the maritime Maya, of Mexica culture, which is like Aztec culture, the mound builders of Cahokia, Cahokia, the ancestral Puebloans, sort of all of that were things or books, architecture, literature, world, city planning, all of that stuff I studied to try to bring to play in this world. But this is a secondary world. Nothing's, sort of one for one. This is wholly from my imagination. But those influences are there. And they exist. And so it made sense to me to make the world sort of Gulf of Mexico. And I will tell you, for the sharp-eyed among you and the folks who frequent tour.com's website, there is a river here that I've been told is backwards. It flows backwards, like the little things come off. And so this is the point where I throw my daughter under the bus. And I that she did that, but I didn't catch it, and the beautiful map maker at Saga Press did not catch it. So clearly, this is a magical world full of rivers that flow backwards, and we're just gonna go with that.
You know what? No, I mean, here's the deal. It's like these are, it's higher elevation here. That's what that is, and it just, it's just going down. This is all plateau up here. And it's just a steep dive down. This is
exactly.
That's the way that's gonna work.
And I told my daughter I was gonna do that. I did it to her once before, and she was like, "Whatever, just say my name." So it's fine.
Exactly. I mean, the fact that she, I think she's probably done just fine as far as.
She did great.
I mean, I will say, when I was her age, back when I used to draw maps of continents, and the way that I would do it is my mom would be driving in the car and I would be in the back seat, and I would have a book and I would have a pen on a piece of paper, and as she drove around and the bumps on the road and stuff like that, that would make the coastline. So
excellent.
So
I think that is a tried and true method. I think actually a lot of cartographers use that, John.
Right. It's been a grand tradition that's been passed down from place to place. Now, I want to go back actually to you mentioning that this is takes a lot of inspiration from pre-Columbian America's culture. And again, you mentioned it's a secondary world. It's not one for one. But at the same time, how do you, as the writer, decide what elements are going to be taken, what things are going to inspire, what things you're going to sort of branch off from what we know about these pre-Columbian cultures? So how do you build based on a real world inspiration is basically the question.
Yeah, well, for this book, so Trail of Lightning was pretty different because a lot of that was lived experience. That was me living on the Navajo Nation, day to day. This is the world. These are the people I know. I didn't do a lot of like research or anything like that. That was just my life.
Sure.
This, on the other hand, is much more historical, like much more historical inspired. So a lot of it is I've just been reading in Mesoamerican history and culture and archaeoastronomy, Aztec poetry, all these things for decades. It's just
Sure.
an area that I love. And so a lot of that was sort of already there in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to celebrate the cultures. I think that a lot of Americans in particular, we don't really appreciate our ancient history.
Sure.
You know, we have pyramids outside of St. Louis that rival anything in Egypt, and most people don't even know they exist. You know, I think there's still this sort of stereotype that pre-Columbian cultures were primitive or savage, and they were anything but. You know, they were complicated, they were rich, they were master astronomers and scientists. And so I really wanted to highlight a lot of that because that was important to me. And then when I was world building, I would often drill down on certain things I needed to know. Like, I knew I wanted a sea voyage because what's an epic fantasy without a sea voyage? But I knew I didn't want it to feel Western or European. So I knew I needed to drill down into like, I chose the Maritime Maya. And there's not a whole lot out there about them because we don't know a whole lot, but there's the scholars working in the field. And so I would, you know, find articles and Kate Elliott, wonderful author, helped me out on some of those, and actually retired and helped me out on some of that. And so I knew, you know, that's sort of when I knew I needed to do that. So I knew I needed to learn something about that. And then I wanted her to have sailing methods. Shiala, who is the captain of the ship in this book, and is also sort of a siren and has other abilities I won't spoil for you. I wanted her sailing methods to feel indigenous. So I learned something about traditional Polynesian sailing methods. And was inspired by that and sort of built her system of navigation around Polynesian philosophy or sailing methods. So that's sort of the way I approached the world building from indigenous cultures.
Right. It was refreshing for me, honestly, in the sense of, and I think it's been mentioned before, you know, so much of fantasy secondary worlds really is European, right? And there's nothing wrong with it, but it becomes something where even in the secondary worlds in and of themselves begin to have their own traditions that are almost historical. Like, you know, not only does, you know, Tolkien build from the Norse, but then everybody builds from Tolkien, and then they build from that sort of stuff. The idea that, one, of course, that there's more to the world than Western Europe, but the idea that there's just something that has not been tackled, that is a world that has not been represented before in a lot of mainstream fantasy. It's just as a reader, is very exciting, and it seems to be happening more often now than it has 10, 20 years before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're seeing it from Eastern Europe. I think you're seeing it from various Asian cultures. Even like African epic fantasy is having sort of an explosion, especially Nigerian-inspired epic fantasy. So yeah, and it makes just the whole genre, I think, richer. I think like what you're saying, we're so stuck with like elves and the horror of like orcs. What the heck was that? And, you know, just all these sort of, you know, and kings even, or gender binaries, or things that we just start taking for granted that this is what the genre looks like. Hey, you write epic fantasy, you have elves and you have kings, you know, and what if you don't have to? What if there are other inspirations? What if there are different ways to think of it and still give a reader sort of all the things they love about epic fantasy? So you can still have sort of your people wrestling with destinies. You can still have, you know, journeys. You can still have magic and all of the things that people love. But you can also challenge some of those ideas and give them something fresh and let them go somewhere else. And I think that's really what I was trying to do with Black Sun.
Right. And I mean, one, I think you've done a very good job of it. But the other thing is that also On one sense, there is for the people who have been writing, and we have the same thing actually in because I write science fiction, and there are very established tropes in science fiction, and there's nothing wrong with those very established tropes, says the man who wrote Old Man's War. But at the same time, what has been very exciting for me as a reader and as a writer is to see people be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else. But at the same time, there is a thing of, as you mentioned, it's like there are things you can cast aside. There are things that you want to keep. You want to be able to tell a story that people get wrapped up in, while at the same time introducing new elements. And for you as a writer and a commercial writer, I mean, I assume that you want people to buy the book and
I do indeed. Yes.
How do you balance the need for things that people can grab hold on that they feel comfortable with the desire to introduce them to a new perspective on the tropes that they've just taken for granted?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I just follow my gut. Like, I'm not sure I even have like a thought on it, except to say that, I believe in the reader. I believe that they will do a little work, that they will push a little through a hard space, that if they're not understanding something, if they're enjoying the story. So if I give you a world and I give you these great characters, then, for example, in the 6 World series, if I'm going to throw Navajo words at you and I'm not going to translate them, you're going to go with it, because it's worth it. I know that in Black Sun, if I'm throwing neo-pronouns at you and you're not used to reading them, yes, I will lose some readers. I know I have, because I've read some of those reviews.
Sure.
But the majority of readers are willing to sort of go with it. And, all credit to the readers, because it's really up to them. They can decide to put the book down if they want, but most won't. Most readers like to be a little bit challenged or to have something new. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, I think, at least as a reader and as a writer, I mean, that's at least some of the reason we work in genre in the first place is, yes, we love our aliens, we love our lasers, and we love our, magic, and we love our large, magical animals and stuff like that. But at the same time, if you can't innovate and if you can't explore and if you can't introduce things that people have not previously encountered, then why are you, why are you in the genre at all?
Right. It's speculative fiction. Let us speculate, right?
Exactly. I wanted to ask you. You have a character in here who's blind, and one of the things that I know is because I wrote the Lock-In series, which had characters who are locked into their bodies, and that's a life experience I haven't had. And so when I was approaching it, there are things that I did, in terms of research and in terms of making sure that although this was a disease that had not existed before, the gross phenomenology of what it was existed, and I needed to make sure that I was being respectful in representation. When you have this character who is a important character, who is blind, how did you go about making sure that your representation of that thing that you are not was respectful and still did the things you needed it to do in the context of your story?
Yeah, well, hopefully I got it right. That would not be up to me to decide. Someone else will let me know.
Sure.
But I worked with like cultural editors or sensitivity readers or whatever it is that you want to call them. I first read a great book that was like the 40 mistakes people make when they write blind characters. And that sort of set me on a path of like, here's these obvious things you want to avoid.
Right.
And then I have a friend who is blind, she was nice enough to sit down with me and tell her about her, just talk to me, just tell me her experiences of being blind and going to blind school. And you'll notice the character, Serapio, he's the one that's blind, is a woodworker in the book.
Mhm.
And that comes right out of Rose's, her name is Rose, right out of her experiences of going to blind school. They would teach them to woodwork so they could learn to work better with their hands, that they could feel, be more sensitive to like feel and form and things like that. And also to give them purpose. That they're creating sort of these incredible things, because often, when people arrived there, they were not at their best emotionally, as you can imagine. Sure. And then after I'd written the manuscript, I had a blind reader read it. And just, flag all the things that she thought, hey, this is a mistake, or, oh, you know what, blind people don't do this. And also she helped me understand things, because it is a fantasy. I wanted to be really careful about things like giving Serapio superpowers, or like super senses, like, oh, now he has bionic hearing, because he's blind. Because she was like, don't do that. But what you can do, is say, hey, you know what? He worked his ass off, for 10 years, learning to be more sensitive to, the ground under his feet, or to, the way, people's heart rates speed up. You can hear their breathing, speed up, or like things like that are real. And he can have like assistive technologies, like crows, or like a cane, the way we have a seeing eye dog, or you might have a cane in real life. And those don't have to be superpowers. Those can be fantastical, because most of us don't have like seeing eye crows. But they can be sort of truer to the blind experience. So that's sort of how I approached it. Hopefully I did a decent job with representation, but I tried to be very careful and very aware that this is not my life experience. But I wanted this character, and he's powerful. He's probably the most powerful character in the book. I call him like a world breaker, so I wanted to make him very, very cool as well.
One of the things that I did when I was deciding with the Lock-in books was I basically said, I know I'm going to get things wrong. And then when people point out the things that I've gotten wrong, what I'm going to do is go, okay, cool. So that when I write the next book, I will make all new mistakes, not the mistakes I previously made. And that's kind of really helped me a lot. I'm going to stop for 1 second here, mention to folks we're going to get to your questions in just a couple minutes, because it's 7:42. So if you have a question, now is the time to use the ask a question thing right over here, and put the question in. We have 4 questions there now. I haven't looked at them yet, so there'll be a surprise once I get there. But go ahead and put the questions in so that we can get to them. I want to ask you, this is novel number 5? 5. So I'm on novel 15 or 16.
Wow.
It's not a brag. It's just, but the thing is, now that you're well into the novel writing thing, have things gotten easier? Have things gotten harder? Has writing a novel taught you to write other novels, or did it, as in the famous words of Gene Wolfe, taught you how to write that one novel? How are you as a novel writer right now?
It's probably a little bit of everything. It took me 3 years to write my first novel, Trail of Lightning.
Sure.
But I was working full time. I had a family, all these sorts of things.
Right.
I got the Star Wars gig. So I wrote a Star Wars novel, for those of you who don't know.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I'm not even going to lie. But it was the bridge between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. And I got that contract in January of 2019. And the movie, comes out in December of that year. And of course, the book has to go to press, well before that. So they're like, you have 4 months. After I got the contract, I'm all excited. I'm going to write a Star Wars. You have 4 months. So I learned a lot about writing in writing that novel. Discipline, outlining, all sorts of stuff, very practical things. But it was also a multi-point of view book. And my first 2 books had been in first person. And actually my children's book was in first person too. and all of a sudden I'm writing in third person, multiple point of view. So I learned a lot about what worked and what didn't for me. And then I took a lot of that to Black Sun, which is a multi-point of view, third person novel. And then I wrote a mid grade novel for the Rick Riordan imprint. And writing for children is like a whole different deal. I don't know if you've written like a middle grade, but wow. So adults bring, they're all their life experience, to the book.
Right.
They are much kinder when it comes to like things like plot holes or filling in missing ideas. Like they probably don't even realize they're doing it, but they're constantly sort of like making it easier on the writer because you can be subtle, and you can do interesting things. Children do not. Children expect it to be on the page exactly how it's supposed to be. They take you, very literally at your word. You cannot skip things because then they will be like, well, I don't understand. Well, what happened? And so I learned a lot about, sort of how to write and not, and not be able to rely on sort of the reader to fill in blanks. And then I could bring that back in and I could still be subtle and I could still do things that maybe you're not going to do, in children's books. But it was very helpful to learn sort of the hows and the whys and sort of the larger what you do and what you don't do, and then get to choose, then make a conscious decision rather than maybe just sort of being lazy with my writing. Is that wrong?
No. I mean, I think that's, actually you bring up what I think is an extraordinarily good point, which is that no matter what it is that you're writing, it puts new tools in your toolbox, right? Yeah. And they're not necessarily things that you were expecting. The fact that children really are literal, and they're also vicious, right? Yeah. They will let you know what you're doing wrong. But adult will be like, first off, it's great. Things have been wonderful. I do have notes. Whereas kids were like, why? Why did you do that? I don't understand. Right? So
they're like, this is boring.
Yeah, well, I don't
not even care.
I want to go play Red Dead Redemption. Why are you making me do this? But regardless, everything puts a new tool in your toolbox, and sometimes you're very surprised what it is that you pull out of the toolbox when you're writing the next book or the next thing.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm gonna look through these questions. Let's see. I have a question for Rebecca. I just found out the Audible version is available and that Kara G is one of the narrators. She is a favorite of mine from The Expanse. Does Rebecca know which character Kara is portraying? I may purchase the audiobook as well.
Oh, I do know which character Kara is portraying. She portrays Narampa. Narampa is the sun priest. She starts as the girl on the wrong side of the tracks in the city of Tova, but she rises to power in the institution of the sun priests that are sort of like the ruling institution over the city. And I would always say about her is that she is a woman who loves an institution that does not love her back. And so she starts to reform that institution, and things do not go well because people with power rarely want to reform, and she doesn't quite, get that until it's a little too late.
Right. It's like, why do you want to mess with a good thing? We've got to going. I don't understand. Why would you do that? I do have to say the religious hierarchy that you have was really intriguing to me, and I was curious how you built that up. Was that a whole cloth sort of thing, or did you bring in inspiration from outside for that?
A little bit. I brought in some inspiration. I read a great book. It's actually listed in the back of this in the acknowledgments of Black Sun. The last chapter is 5 or 6 texts that I think are really accessible that people might be interested in. And one of them was something like power and religion in the Southwest or something like that, that really went into detail about sort of what we know about the political and religious structures of Chaco Canyon, for example.
Sure.
And so I did look at that, and I looked at sort of what we know of the Aztec religious structures and their priesthood and how they function. And then a lot of it I just sort of made up too. So with those sort of ideas in mind, I was like, I really wanted to create this sort of old gods versus new, but the new god
Hmm.
is science, as the people in the book would see it, not as we would see science,
Sure.
but certainly the stars and the planets and these things that they saw as constants, as opposed to like the chaos of Earth.
Right.
That was their science, so they can look at that and be like, well, every year, the sun does this, every year there's a solstice, every year there's an equinox, all these sorts of things.
Sure.
These are, constants. We can build our world around these. This is science. So anyway, yeah. Sort of like a lot of that.
A question from people who have already gotten their favorites from the book in terms of characters.
Right.
So have you thought that we might get to visit the Teak world? Because they love the captain, whose name once again, Shala. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
It was a lot like Kiva, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed that, but she reminds me a lot of her.
I did not notice that. I liked her quite a lot. I didn't think it was intentional, but I was like, I like this character a lot.
I don't know that it was intentional, although I have obviously read, the interdependency.
Sure.
So who knows what gets in your head? But
I'm always very, very careful to be when I see something that is similar or it has the same flavor or something I write. I'm very careful not to be like, yes, they took it from me. I am an inspiration, because on that path lies wanton ego, and someone will push you out of a window. But at any event, but I will say that Chrissy just finished my wife Chrissy just finished a new book. And I have recommended this to her, and I specifically the character of Shala was going to be one that she's going to dig because Chrissy. But anyway, the Teak are.
Oh yes, you are going to find out more about the Teak. Yes, indeed. It's a rich culture. It's so different. I think. When I was writing a lot of the epigraphs, which are these little sayings at the beginning of each chapter that really I think function to make the world sort of richer, give it a deeper foundation. There are mythic cycles, there are books of lamentation, so things like this that you get a glimpse of without me having to sort of slow the pace of the novel and tell you, what's sort of going on. So they're really working hard, at least in my mind. Hopefully people read them. I know people don't always read the epigraphs, but read the epigraphs. Anyway, the Teak ones are always these sort of like pithy, sort of pessimistic sayings, or curses, this sort of thing. The Teak are an all-female culture. They're very mysterious. They're out in sort of the islands in a floating city somewhere. You don't find out a whole lot about them except that Shala got herself exiled from her home. And so, yes, as one does. So in later books, you will definitely spend some time with the Teak.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, because as a follow-up, and in the sense of when you were thinking of the Teak, I mean, I know for me that a lot of times once I start having somebody from a particular place, or they have a particular mood or something, and people are like, oh, I want to explore that. And I'm like, yes, we will explore that. And I'm like, oh crap, now I have to think about this. Right?
Right.
You've built out the Teak a little bit more than what we've seen already, is what I'm saying. Or are we, not to put you on the spot. Yeah.
No, I have. I actually know. I did not know what was going to happen in book 2 and 3 of the trilogy when I finished book 1. But when I went to write book 2, I realized I need to know how everything's going to end, or else book 2 is just going to like flail around and be sloppy and unsatisfying. So I did figure out the ending. And so I do know, sort of where we're going, and that we are going to spend some time with the Teak because it is important to the story. Clearly, Shala, if you've read it, she's got to sort of confront her past and deal with her sort of boozing ways and sort of like grow up a little bit. So she's going to have to sort of face her own demons, and that is definitely going to require that she return home. I'll give you that.
you have, by the way, absolutely nailed something that I absolutely resented about writing a trilogy, that I actually had to think about book 3 while I was writing book 2, because without knowing what's happening in book 3, book 2 isn't going to work, because you'll just be like, the mushy middle of the
The
trilogy.
mushy middle, absolutely.
And I just hated that. I was like, how dare you require me to think ahead? This is bullshit. I just, what current authors or series are you reading? Who are your favorite authors and how do they influence you? That's actually 2 separate questions, but I'll allow it.
Yeah. And
What
then,
you're reading
John,
now,
you
and
should
who are your
answer it
favorite?
too.
I know. But go ahead, you first.
Oh, okay. So, I will tell you that last year's Hugo nominees were like, just, sorry, I have children outside my window. There's totally distracting them now.
I get it.
That was just, yeah. So last year's Hugo nominees, Embarrassment of Riches. I love Arcady Martine's Memory Called Empire. I like to refer to that as Aztecs in Space. So, that was really my jam. Just beautiful world building, just all these little details where I'd be like, oh, the Aztecs did that. Oh, I know exactly where she got that. So just awesome stuff. I love Tamsin Muir's Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth out this year.
Sure.
Just weird gonzo necromancer stuff. Necromancers in space again, but also like locked door mystery, also like dealing with grief and PTSD and like convoluted timelines and second person. And to me, she is just sort of that balls out writer who's just like, I'm just going to write this and people are going to like it or they're not going to like it. And, too bad because my head is weird.
Yeah.
And love that. Love her stuff. So that's, I guess, who I'm reading right now. I also, Dejeli Clark, Peter Djeli Clark, hopefully I'm saying his name right. Is brilliant. I like everything he writes. Really, really, The Haunting of Tramcar 52, I believe. Ring Shout, which is out now.
Right.
He has this sort of steampunk Cairo in a number of his books. Master of Jinn, which is coming out. Just gorgeous stuff. Really cool.
Yeah. No, I'm in the same boat with you, which is that I tell people I'm glad I won my Hugo when I did, because fuck, right?
Right?
There's so much good stuff out there, and as a reader, you do feel spoiled for choice, right? Because and again, and honestly, you're part of this. It's people who are becoming centered in the genre who are not necessarily centered in the genre before, going, it is my genre, and if you don't like it, that's too bad, because here I am and I'm sticking my claim to it. Right. And as a writer, I find it exciting because just like watching people, I don't want to call it stunting because it's not stunting. There's so much craft involved there. But I think you nailed it, for example, with Tamsin Muir. It's just like, I don't know where your head is at, but boy, I'm glad it's there. But the other thing is also as a writer who is also a reader, I really like reading what's coming out these days, because in so many ways, Black Sun is a good example of this. What Nora Jemison's doing is an example of this. What Arcadian, what Tamsin Muir are doing. There's no possible way I could write that. Not only just because I'm not that particular person, but their perspectives, the point of view, the life experience is absolutely not something that I have. And it's fine. I'm not sitting there going, well, my stuff sucks next. My stuff is fine. But what I'm saying is, as a reader, there's so much more that's out there that, you just, it feels inspired, even though I'm not like sitting there like going, oh, I'm going to steal this from Tamsin Muir, because no, I'm not. That's just not going to work for me. No. But the attitude of, I'm going to write the thing that I'm going to write and you're going to like it, or if you're not going to like it, that's fine, but it's still, here it is. I'm 100% totally get down with that. And like I said, kind of the same thing here. It's like I think you're writing without apology, right? This is what you write. Yes. And that's important. So let's do one more question. Oh wait, no, we didn't talk about no, we'll get back. We have those food. Did any of your characters surprise you, and why?
Did any of my characters surprise me? Oh, that's a good question. Interesting. Well, I'm sort of God in my story. So I
Yes.
don't know if my
Yes.
characters surprise me per se. I pretty much know what they're going to do because, I'm God.
Yeah.
But
Right.
some of them are more challenging than others. Some of them surprise me in the sense that I really have to sort of dig deep, or I have to sort of, there are people or characters that I immediately relate to, that I immediately get because they're part of me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I understand that. That's just right out of my childhood sort of stuff. And then
Sure.
there's characters that are not really me at all, but I know that there's somebody, and so I have to really spend time getting to know their point of view and getting to understand them. And so all sort of your observational skills kick in, and I start trying to watch people that aren't like me, or spend time trying to figure out how people like to think, or something like that. So
Sure.
yeah, I guess in that sense, not so much surprise, but challenge. They definitely challenge me.
Yeah. I do think that there's kind of a mythos that sometimes characters get away from authors. You know what I mean? Which I'm on the same boat with you. It's like, no, I'm God. They don't go where I don't want them to go. But what I do think is true is that in the writing of the character, you learn more about the character, and sometimes the character reveals, or you reveal more about the character than you initially thought about them, and that sometimes happens.
That's true. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is 8:01, so I think we are pretty much where we need to be.
Oh.
And hey, look, here you are.
Hey, oh, I'm so sorry to end that conversation. It was fantastic.
Well, good people to have conversations with.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you, John. It was a wonderful conversation. I've dropped a million order links in the chat. Sorry to spam you, but
Yeah.
all of the books are excellent. There's a link to all of Rebecca's books that we sell at the Strand, which please feel free to sort through. And if
Sure.
you want an extra copy of Black Sun, you do have friends. Feel free. And on that note, thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
John. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, The Strand, for
Bye-bye.
having me. It was awesome.
Yes. Great. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.